Howdy folks, this is Eston Walden. We're back again for another audiobook review. Today we're going to be looking at the book called Noob Game Plus. It's in the Noob Town series, which is a pretty hilarious series. It's written by Rimmel and narrated by Johnathan McClain. So, one note I want to make about this before I continue on with the rest of the review. This book series is hilarious. In the world of fantasy, you have a lot of like serious action, like battles to overcome evil. Like you have that in this book too. Like that's all here. But this book is funny, and the series is hilarious. This might be one of the more serious books in the series because of the things that happened at the end of the previous book. We'll get into a little bit of that here. But in general, this is a funny series. It's like a comedy series to some extent, and that factors into some of the ratings that I make and how I rate this. It doesn't mean I rate it any more or less rigorously. It just kind of changes, per se, my viewpoint and how I think about it. So the book itself gets a 4.5 out of 5. The narrator gets a 5, and the overall is 4.666 repeating. So essentially 4.67. So to start off with, uniqueness. This book is not super unique. It combines, it falls into that generalized genre of literature RPG meets real world. So there's like a whole branch of literature RPGs in which the real world mechanics are RPG-like mechanics with screens and levels and classes and stuff like that. And so this world fits into that. And so in that sense, it's a new-ish genre, but it's getting fairly large. So if it was just that, I would probably give it a 4. But the thing that really sets it apart is that it applies comedy to that genre. And it does that by exploiting the fact that the main character comes from our world, and so he has insights and knowledge that you would only have from our world, and he also blunders into things that he wouldn't because he's not used to this new world. And instead of that causing like serious issues, which it does sometimes, it's almost more like a comedy skit where you have your classic Tom and Jerry. Tom runs over a gardening hoe and it smacks him in the face, and everyone laughs. And so turning this lit RPG world into a comedy gives it like an extra half point in my book. So that's what I was talking about earlier with the rating scales, and so that's kind of what we might be able to see going forward. So I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 for uniqueness. It may be a little high, but I feel like the comedy really adds to it. Some books have comedy in them. This book feels like it was written to be a comedy, especially the series. This book is slightly more serious, but at least it starts that way. As far as character development, great job here. There was we were left in a little bit of limbo at the end of the previous series, our previous book. We were left, I don't want to give too much away. Just as a note, my reviews are not supposed to be spoilers. They're just supposed to give you an idea of how good a book is, which is why I don't get into too fine grain of detail. I try to like gloss over some of the details. So, coming into this book, we're at like book 5, I think. Coming into this book, you're left kind of wondering how the character is going to grow from here. Not in the sense that like he's like ultra powerful and like how could he get stronger. It's more like he's put into a situation where there's a lot of options and we don't know what he's going to do, and we don't know how the world's going to restrict him and things like that. And so So the book could have went any number of ways. I like a lot of what was done here. Throughout this book, he started off at a fairly, low-ish strength. That got rectified well before the halfway mark, to a point where he was at a similar strength to where he was in the previous books, and then he grew from there as well. And so he grew differently in the sense that he's not the exact same character that he was from previous books, but grew and allowed us to see some different aspects of the magic and class system that we wouldn't have seen in previous books. And so so there's that, and then so that would have been maybe a 4 out of 5. But in addition to that, the character had a very major psychological trauma to deal with in this book that he was able to grow and get past. And he had a coping mechanism at the very beginning of the book that was very, like, in the real world, this would be a very reasonable thing to do and to think, and was able to overcome that and become more true to his character, and it allowed for a little bit of rounding, right? So now there's like an internal conflict that he has to work between, which really makes his character feel more real. And so with that in mind, I feel like the book really deserves a 5 out of 5 for character development. Flip side, secondary characters. Previous books in the series, top marks. This book, I didn't give it as high of a rating. We didn't really get to see a lot of the secondary characters from previous books. We got to, they were there to a very minor degree. And the new secondary characters that we got were good. They had some strengths. They grew some, but they just felt a little bit more flat. This is like the first book that they were in. The book was more about the main character acclimating to his situation, not as much about the other characters in the book. And so I only gave it a 4 out of 5 for secondary characters. But historically, the book has been really good on that front, and so that could be a lower rating than maybe what it deserves. That's just how I felt. Into the magic system. So the magic system, on a very basic fundamental level, is a class-based magic system. Everyone has a class. They have access to the same types of skills and stuff. It's a class skill tree-based magic system, which is not very unique in that sense. But it is, intricately thought out and planned for. It makes sense. Well, at least it does to the people on the inside. This is another case where, like, the book uses this for a lot of humorous opportunities where the main character doesn't know things that literally everyone else in this world knows, and so he blunders into a lot of things that he probably wouldn't have if he would have been more understanding. But one place that this book extends this mechanic to make it something a little bit more unique is that there are opportunities to get abilities from other classes. So a warrior and a rogue might be able to have similar movement capabilities, and you might, if you were to get both of them, they can fuse together to create a new unique thing that's a mix of those two movement abilities, with pluses and minuses from both of them. And so with that in mind, and with the way that the magic system is used, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It wasn't unique enough for me to give it a full 5. It just wasn't that thought-provoking and interesting, but it was fun to see how to use a magic system to once again elicit more comedy, because that's what it feels like this book is really driving towards. Then we move on to the narration. So first off is dynamic voicing, 5 out of 5. On top of being able to provide, good inflection and tone, whenever characters were like angry or sad, like when a character's outraged, like the narrator's yelling, like in the voice of that character, like you can tell that that character is angry. You don't have to be told directly by the book. On top of that, there's an extra skill that I feel like this narrator had to bring to the table for this book. Anybody who looks and studies comedy knows that comedy is about timing. It's about pitch and tone. Like if you tell the same joke wrong, it's gonna fall flat, and that didn't happen in this book. The way that the jokes were put out there, I feel like they were just as funny. I think they're probably funnier than if you would have read them. And so I feel like that really brings it to the table. That's like reading a comic sketch versus, listening to a comedy routine from a comedian. Bad comedian could make it, fall flat, and reading it off of a page would be more enjoyable. And then a good comedian makes you roll on the floor laughing, and you have to pause the book because you can't even pay attention because you're laughing. And that's the kind of thing that happens in this book. And so that's a perfect pairing in between your narrator and your author. The author created and set up the jokes, the narrator delivered them, and it was fantastic. So 5 out of 5 for dynamic voicing. On top of that, the narrator does a great job with his vocal cast. So he got a 5 out of 5 for that. One of the defining factors is that each character is unique, has a unique voice, and the best way to explain it is that, I mentioned earlier that for secondary characters, we barely got to hear from some of the secondary characters of the other books. But when we did, from the voice that was provided, I knew who they were. It sparked memories in my brain of things that they said, ways that they acted in previous books from their voice. I could recognize them more from their voice than their names, which in this book is saying a lot because they have some fantastically outrageous names in this book. Outlandish maybe is the right phrase. And so they have very unique names, but the voices is what really brought them to life and made them memorable, for me at least. And so 5 out of 5 for vocal cast. Then we go on to our extra information, age ratings. I think this is an 18 and above book. So there are some adult topics discussed. The book has quite a bit of gore to it, which is surprising for a comedy book. Maybe it's not, but it is to me. And there is discussion of sexual body parts, sexual acts. There's not a lot of explicit sex happening in the book, but there are adult topics, and so 18 and above would be what I would recommend. Obviously, if you have a mature high schooler, they could potentially get this, but this is one of those books I would recommend the parent being fully informed before they let their kid listen to. I actually cannot remember if there's use of language or not. It's always kind of weird whenever you're listening to a fantasy book, because sometimes they have their own curse words and stuff, and I really don't remember for this book, but there's enough other stuff that I would recommend you being 18 or older. On the humor scale, it's very high. The book has, this specific book, and some of the other ones too, have some serious moments, but that's not what this book is about. It is all about bringing the funny. This series has a lot of chaste romances in it, in which the main character is thinking about other characters. either trying to not think about them sexually, or it's being thrust upon him to some extent. Other characters in the book series historically have not had a challenging time having sexual encounters. This character, the main character, has though. So romance, sexuality is talked about in this book. It's not a main point, but it wouldn't surprise me if that comes up in future books, and it definitely comes up in previous books. So if you haven't listened to the series, be prepared for that. Action and gore, tons of action, quite a bit of gore. When I was writing down notes about it, whenever you're in a fantasy world in which people can just be healed up, to some extent at the drop of the hat, gore can be used to really bring home the point of like how bad the damage is and how painful it would be to experience something like that. And so getting into just slightly more detail about like ripping someone's arm off really brings home, the realism that the characters feel in the story, even though, healing in this world exists. And so, yes, there is gore in this book. It's not ridiculous amounts. It feels like it makes sense for the story, but it does exist. And engagement, this book does a great job of. I don't know. Like, I think I was only listening to this book for like 2 or 3 days. Like, I just couldn't put it down. And every book in the series has been this way. And so, highly recommended. Love this book series. So that's it. Just a review. It's a comedy book. The book itself got 4.5 out of 5. Narrator got a full 5 out of 5. Overall 4.66. 666666666. And it's in the Noobtown series, and it's fantastic, and I highly encourage you to read it. Yeah, that's it. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know what I did right or wrong. I have a new mic, so if things come through clearer, than they did before, let me know if you like it. If you don't, I'm probably not returning it, but it's good to know that it sounds good. Let's see here. If you don't use Audible, I highly recommend it. That's where I listen to all of my audiobooks. Audible has a great selection, and if you're on the plan, you can either be, depending on if you're on the 1 or 2 credit a month plan, you get a credit that you can use to get any book of any size. And so, and sometimes they have like trilogies that are paired together and you get all of them. They have sales. They have a daily deal every day where there's a book that's like $5. And that's pretty fantastic. It's not always a fantasy book, but it comes around, and then I get it for cheap, and then I'll do a review of it. And so that's pretty great. And then they have, 2-for-1 deals. They have all kinds of stuff. Because anybody who listens to audiobooks know that they're expensive. And so any way you can get them for cheap is great. You can buy more credits, which I highly recommend. It's cheaper than buying the books. 3 credits on average comes out to like $11 or $13 a pop, which is cheaper than $25 for buying the book without them. And so, yeah, it's a great thing. There's a link for it if you want a free trial. My Patreon link is there. You get nothing out of it except for, the joy of supporting me and helping me buy more books. I'll probably provide a link to some NewAge products. I use NewAge. They have some supplements, like they have some vitamin supplements. The thing I like the most is the shake. They have like a protein shake that you can drink. I use that for lunch every day. In addition to being like healthy, nutritious, providing nutrients and stuff, I just like it because it's easy. Like, it takes me, a couple of minutes to make my shake. I have that and apple for lunch every day. So I'll probably provide a link for that. I do like that product. But yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys and gals. I appreciate you all listening, and have a good day. Bye.